From the Caves and Jungles of Hindustan by Madame Blavatsky. City of the Dead. What would be your choice if you had to choose between being blind and being deaf? 9 people out of 10 answer this question by positively preferring deafness to blindness, and one whose good fortune it has been to contemplate even for a moment some fantastic fairy-like corner of India, this country of lace-like marble palaces and enchanting gardens, would willingly add to deafness, lameness of both legs, rather than lose such sights. We are told that Saadi, S-A-A-D-I, the great poet, bitterly complained of his friends looking tired and indifferent, while he praised the beauty and charm of his lady love. If the happiness of contemplating her wondrous beauty remonstrated here was yours, as it is mine, you could not fail to understand my verses, which, alas, describe in such meager and inadequate terms the rapturous feelings experienced by everyone who sees her, even from a distance. I fully sympathize with the enamored poet, but cannot condemn his friends who never saw his lady love, and that is why I tremble lest my constant rhapsodies on India should bore my readers as much as Saadi bored his friends. But what, I pray you, is the poor narrator to do when new, undreamed of charms are daily discovered in the lady love in question? Her darkest aspects, abject and immoral as they are, and sometimes of such a nature as to excite your horror, even these aspects are full of some wild poetry, of originality which cannot be met in any other country. It is not unusual for a European novice to shudder with disgust at some of the features of local everyday life, but at the same time, these very sights attract and fascinate the attention like a horrible nightmare. We have plenty of these experiences while our école buissonnière lasted. We spent these days far from railways and from any other vestige of civilization. Happily so, because European civilization does not suit India any better than a fashionable bonnet would suit a half-naked Peruvian maiden, a true daughter of the sun of Cortez's time. All the day long we wandered across rivers and jungles, passing villages and ruins of ancient fortresses, over local board roads between Nasik and Jubalpur, traveling with the aid of bullock cars, elephants, horses, and very often being carried in palks, P-A-L-K-S. At sunfall, we put up our tents and we slept anywhere. These days offered us an opportunity of seeing that man decidedly can surmount trying and even dangerous conditions of climate, though perhaps in a passive way, by mere force of habit. In the afternoons, when we, white people, were very near fainting with the roasting heat, in spite of thick cork toppies, T-O-P-I-S, and such shelter as we could procure, and even our native companions had to use more than the usual supplies of muslin round their heads. The Bengali Babu traveled on horseback, endless miles under the vertical rays of the hot sun, bareheaded, protected only by his thick crop of hair. The sun has no influence whatever on Bengali skulls. They are covered only on solemn occasions. In cases of weddings and great festivities, their turbans are useless adornments, like flowers in a European lady's hair. Bengali Babus are born clerks. They invade all railroad stations, post and telegraph offices, and government law courts, wrapped in their white muslin toga virilis, their legs bare up to the knees, their heads unprotected, they proudly loaf on the platform of railway stations or at the entrances of their offices, casting contemptuous glances on the Mahrattis who dearly love their numerous rings and lovely earrings in the upper part of their right ears. Bengalis, unlike the rest of the Hindus, do not paint sectarian signs on their foreheads. The only trinket they do not completely despise is an expensive necklace. But even this is not common. Contrary to all expectations, the Marathis, with all their little effeminate ways, are the bravest tribe of India, gallant and experienced soldiers, a fact which has been demonstrated by centuries of fighting. But Bengal has never as yet produced a single soldier out of its 65 million inhabitants. Not a single Bengali is to be found in the native regiments of the British Army. This is a strange fact which I refused to believe at first, but which has been confirmed by many English officers and by Bengalis themselves. But with all this, they are far from being cowardly. Their wealthy classes do lead a somewhat effeminate life, but their zemindars and peasantry are undoubtedly brave. Disarmed by their present government, the Bengali peasants go out to meet the tiger, which in their country is more ferocious than elsewhere, armed only with a club, as composedly as they used to go with rifles and swords. Many out-of-the-way paths and groves, which most probably have never been trodden before by a European foot, were visited by us during these short days. Gulab Lal Singh was absent, but we were accompanied by a trusted servant of his, and the welcome we met with almost everywhere was certainly the result of the magic influence of his name. If the wretched naked peasants shrank from us and shut their doors at our approach, the Brahmins were as obliging as could be desired. The sights around Kandash, on the way to Thanur and Muau, I don't know how to pronounce that, M-H-A-U, are very picturesque, but the effect is not entirely due to nature's beauty. Art has a good deal to do with it, especially in Muslim cemeteries. Now they are all more or less destroyed and deserted, owing to the increase of the Hindu inhabitants around them and to the Muslim princes, once the rightful lords of India being expelled. Muslims of the present day are badly off and have put up with more humiliations than even the Hindus, but still they have left many memorials behind them, and amongst others their cemeteries. The Muslim fidelity to the dead is a very touching feature of their character. Their devotion to those who are gone is always more demonstrative than their affection for the living members of their families, and almost entirely concentrates itself on their last abodes. In proportion as their notions of paradise are coarse and material, the appearance of their cemeteries is poetical, especially in India. One may pleasantly spend whole hours in these shady, delightful gardens, amongst their white monuments, crowned with turbans, covered with roses and jessamine, and sheltered with rows of cypresses. We often stopped in such places to sleep and dine. A cemetery near Thalmo is especially attractive. Out of several mausoleums in a good state of preservation, the most magnificent is the monument of the family of Kiladar, Kiladar, who was hanged on the city tower by the order of General Hislop in 1818. 4 other mausoleums attracted our attention, and we learned that one of them is celebrated throughout India. It is a white marble octagon covered from top to bottom with carving, the like of which could not be found even in Père Lachaise. P-E-R-E with an accent grave over the first E, L-A-C-H-A-I-S-E. A Persian inscription on its base records that it cost 100,000 rupees. One day, bathed in the hot rays of the sun, its tall, minaret-like outline looks like a block of ice against the blue sky. By night, with the aid of the intense, phosphorescent moonlight proper to India, it is more dazzling and poetical. The summit looks as if it were covered with freshly fallen snow crystals. Raising its slender profile against the dark background of bushes, it suggests some pure midnight apparition, soaring over the silent abode of destruction and lamenting what will never return. Side by side with these cemeteries rise the Hindu Ghats, G-H-A-T-S, with a circumflex over the A, generally by the river bank. There really is something grand in the ritual of burning the dead. Witnessing this ceremony, the spectator is struck with the deep philosophy underlying the fundamental idea of this custom. In the course of an hour, nothing remains of the body but a few handfuls of ashes. A professional Brahmin, like a priest of death, scatters these ashes to the winds over a river. The ashes of once lived and felt, loved and hated, rejoiced and wept, are thus given back again to the four elements, to earth, which fed it during such a long time, out of which it grew and developed, to fire, emblem of purity that has just devoured the body, in order that the spirit may be rid of everything impure and may freely gravitate to the new sphere of posthumous existence, where every sin is a stumbling block on the way to moksha, or the infinite bliss, to air which it inhaled and through which it lived, and to water which purified it physically and spiritually, and is now to receive its ashes into her pure bosom. The adjective pure, P-U-R-E, must be understood in the figurative sense of the mantram. Generally speaking, the rivers of India, beginning with the thrice sacred Ganges, are dreadfully dirty, especially near villages and towns. In these rivers, about 200 millions of people daily cleanse themselves from the tropical perspiration and dirt. The corpses of those who are not worth burning are thrown in the same rivers, and their number is great, because it includes all Shudras, pariahs, and various other outcasts, as well as Brahmin children under 3 years of age. Only rich and highly born people are buried pompously. It is for them that the sandalwood fires are lit after sunset. It is for them that mantrams are chanted, and for them that the gods are invoked. But Shudras must not listen on any account to the divine words dictated at the beginning of the world by the four rishis, to Veda Vyasa, the great theologian of Aryavarta. No fires for them, no prayers, as during life a Shudra never approaches a temple nearer than 7 steps, so even after death he cannot be put on the same level with the twice born. Brightly burn the fires, extending like a fiery serpent along the river. The dark outlines of strange, wildly fantastical figures silently move amongst the flames. Sometimes they raise their arms toward the sky, as if in a prayer. Sometimes they add fuel to the fires and poke them with long iron pitchforks. The dying flames rise high, creeping and dancing, sputtering with melted human fat and shooting upwards to the sky, whole showers of golden sparks, which are instantly lost in the clouds of black smoke. This on the right side of the river. Let us now see what's going on the left. In the early hours of the morning, when the red fires, the black clouds of the miasmas, and the thin figures of the fakirs grow dim and vanish little by little, when the smell of burned flesh is blown away by the fresh wind, which rises at the approach of the dawn, when, in a word, the right side of the river, with its gotas, plunges into stillness and silence, to be reawakened. When the evening comes, processions of a different kind appear on the left bank. We see groups of Hindu men and women in sad, silent trains. They approach the river quietly. They do not cry. They have no rituals to perform. We see two men carrying something, long and thin, wrapped in an old red rug. Holding it by its head and feet, they swing it into the dirty yellowish waves of the river. The shock is so violent that the red rug flies open, and we behold the face of a young woman tinged with dark green who quickly disappears in the river. Further on, another group, an old man and two young women. One of them, a little girl of 10, small, thin, hardly fully developed, sobs bitterly. She is the mother of a stillborn child whose body is to be thrown into the river. Her weak voice monotonously resounds over the shore, and her trembling hands are not strong enough to lift the poor little corpse that is more like a little tiny brown kitten than a human being. The old man tries to console her, and taking the body in his own hands, enters the water and throws it right in the middle. After him, both the women get into the river, and having plunged 7 times to purify themselves from the touch of the dead body, they return home, their clothes dripping with wet. In the meanwhile, vultures, crows, and other birds of prey gather in thick clouds and considerably retard the progress of the bodies down the river. Occasionally, some half-stripped skeleton is caught by the reeds and stranded there helplessly for weeks, until an outcast, whose sad duty it is to busy himself all his life long with such unclean work, takes notice of it, and catching it by the ribs with his long hook, restores it to its highway towards the ocean. But let us leave the river bank, which is unbearably hot in spite of the early hour. Let us bid goodbye to the watery cemetery of the poor. Disgusting and heartrending are such sights in the eyes of a European. And unconsciously, we allow the light wings of reverie to transport us to the far north, to the peaceful village cemeteries, where there are no marble monuments crowned with turbans, no sandalwood fires, no dirty rivers to serve the purpose of a last resting place, but where humble wooden crosses stand in rows, sheltered by old birches. How peacefully our dead repose under the rich green grass. None of them ever saw these gigantic palms, sumptuous palaces and pagodas covered with gold, but on their poor graves grow violets and lilies of the valley, and in the spring evenings nightingales sing to them in the old birch trees. No nightingales ever sing for me, either in the neighboring groves or in my own heart. the latter least of all. Let us stroll along this wall of reddish stone. It will lead us to a fortress once celebrated and drenched with blood, now harmless and half ruined. Like many another Indian fortress, flocks of green parrots, startled by our approach, fly from under every cavity of the old wall, their wings shining in the sun like so many flying emeralds. This territory is accursed by Englishmen. This is Chandvad, where during the Sepoy, Sepoy, mutiny, the Bills, Bhils, streamed from their ambuscades like a mighty mountain torrent, and cut many an English throat. Tatva, Tatva, an ancient Hindu book treating of the geography of the times of King Asaka, Asoka, 250 to 300 BC, teaches us that the Marathi territory spreads up to the wall of Chandvad or Chandor, and that the Khandesh country begins on the other side of the river. But English people do not believe in Tatva or in any other authority and want us to learn that Khandesh begins right at the foot of the Chandor hillocks. 12 miles southeast from Chandvad, there is a whole town of subterranean temples known under the name of Enke Tenke, ENKAY-TENKY. Here again the entrance is 100 feet from the base, and the hill is pyramidal. I must not attempt to give a full description of these temples, as this subject must be worked out in a way quite impossible in a newspaper article. So I shall only note here all the statues, idols, and carvings are ascribed to Buddhist ascetics of the first centuries after the death of Buddha. I wish I could content myself with this statement, but unfortunately, Monsieur les archéologues meet here with an unexpected difficulty, and a more serious one than all the difficulties brought on them by the inconsistencies of all the other temples put together. In these temples, there are more idols designated Buddhas than anywhere else. They cover the main entrance, sit in thick rows along the balconies, occupy the inner walls of the cells, watch the entrances of all the doors like monster giants, and 2 of them sit in the chief tank where spring waters wash them century after century without any harm to their granite bodies. Some of these Buddhas are decently clad with pyramidal pagodas as their headgear. Others are naked, some sit, some stand, some are real colossi, some tiny, some of middle size. However, all this would not matter. We may go so far as to overlook the fact of Gautama's or Siddhartha Buddha's reform, consisting precisely in his earnest desire to tear up by the roots the Brahmanical idol worship, though of course we cannot help remembering that his religion remained pure from idol worship of any kind during centuries until the lamas of Tibet, the Chinese, the Burmese, and the Siamese, taking it into their own hands, disfigured it and spoilt it with heresies. We cannot forget that, persecuted by conquering Brahmins and expelled from India, it found at last a shelter in Ceylon, where it still flourishes like the legendary aloe, which is said to blossom once in its lifetime and then to die, as the root is killed by the exuberance of the blossom, and the seeds cannot produce anything but weeds. All this we may overlook, as I said before, but the difficulty of the archaeologist still exists, if not in the fact of idols being ascribed to early Buddhists, than in the physiognomies, in the type of all these Enke Tenke Buddhas. They all, from the tiniest to the hugest, are Negroes with flat noses, thick lips, 45 degrees of the facial angle, and curly hair. There is not the slightest likeness between these faces and any of the Siamese or Tibetan Buddhas, which all have purely Mongolian features and perfectly straight hair. This unexpected African type, unheard of in India, upsets the antiquarians entirely. This is why the archaeologists avoid mentioning these caves. Enke Tenke is a worse difficulty for them than even Nazik. They find it as hard to conquer as the Persians found Thermopylae. We passed by Meliganba and Chikaval, where we examined an exceedingly curious ancient temple of the Jainas. No cement was used in the building of its outer walls. They consist entirely of square stones, which are so well wrought and so closely joined that the blade of the thinnest knife cannot be pushed between two of them. The interior of the temple is richly decorated. On our way back, we did not stop in Thalner, but went straight on to Gara, Ghara. There we had to hire elephants again to visit the splendid ruins of Mandu, once a strongly fortified town about 20 miles due northeast of this place. This time we got there speedily and safely. I mention this place because some time later I witnessed in its vicinity a most curious sight offered by the branch of the numerous Indian rites, which is generally called devil worship. Mandu is situated on the ridge of the Vindhya Mountains, about 2,000 feet above the surface of the sea. According to Malcolm's statement, this town was built in AD 313 and for a long time was the capital of the Hindu Rajas of Dara, Dhara. The historian Ferishta points to Mandu as the residence of Dilavan Kanguru, the first king of Malwa, M-A-L-W-A, who flourished in 1387 to 1405. In 1526, the town was taken up by Bahadur Shah, king of Gujarat. But in 1570, Akbar won this town back, and a marble slab over the town gate still bears his name and the date of his visit. On entering this vast city, in its present state of solitude, the natives call it the Dead Town, we all experienced a peculiar feeling, not unlike the sensation of a man who enters Pompeii for the first time. Everything shows that Mandu was once one of the wealthiest towns of India. The town wall is 37 miles long. Streets ran whole miles on their sides. Streets ran whole miles. On their sides stand ruined palaces, and marble pillars lie on the ground. Black excavations of the subterranean halls, in the coolness of which rich ladies spent the hottest hours of the day, peer from dilapidated granite walls. Further on are broken stairs, dry tanks, waterless fountains, endless empty yards, marble platforms, and disfigured arches of majestic porches. All this is overgrown with creepers and shrubs, hiding the dens of wild beasts. Here and there, a well-preserved wall of some palace rises high above the general wreck, its empty windows fringed with parasitic plants, blinking and staring at us like sightless eyes protesting against troublesome intruders. And still further, in the very center of the ruins, the heart of the dead town sends forth a whole crop of broken cypresses, an untrimmed grove on the place where heaved so many beasts once and clamored so many passions. In 1570, this town was called Shadiabad, Shadiabad, the abode of happiness. Shadiabad. The Franciscan missionaries Adolf Aquaviva Adolf Aquaviva, Ontario de Montserrat, and others who came here in that year as an embassy from Goa, Goa, to seek various privileges from the Mughal government, described it over and over again. At his epoch, it was one of the greatest cities in the world, whose magnificent trees and luxurious ways used to astonish the most pompous courts of India. It seemed almost incredible that in such a short period nothing should remain of this town but the heaps of rubbish, amongst which we could hardly find room enough for our tent. At last we decided to pitch it in the only building which remained in a tolerable state of preservation, in Yami Masjid, the cathedral mosque, on a granite platform about 25 steps higher than the square. The stairs, constructed of pure marble, like the greater part of the town buildings, are broad and almost untouched by time, but the roof has entirely disappeared, and so we were obliged to put up with the stars for a canopy. All around this building runs a low gallery supported by several rows of thick pillars. From a distance, it reminds one, in spite of its being somewhat clumsy and lacking in proportion, of the Acropolis of Athens. From the stairs we rested for a while. There was a view of the mausoleum of Gushanga Guri, the king of Malwa, in whose reign the town was at the culmination of its brilliancy and glory. It is a massive, majestic, white marble edifice with a sheltered peristyle and finely carved pillars. This peristyle once led straight to the palace, but now it's surrounded by a deep ravine full of broken stones and overgrown with cacti. The interior of the mausoleum is covered with gold lettering of inscriptions from the Quran, and the sarcophagus of the Sultan is placed in the middle. Close by it stands the palace of Baz Bahadur, all broken to pieces, nothing now but a heap of dust, covered with trees. We spent the whole day visiting these sad remains, and returned to our sheltering place a little before sunset, exhausted with hunger and thirst, but triumphantly carrying our little sticks, 3 huge snakes, killed on our way home. Tea and supper were waiting for us. To our great astonishment, we found visitors in the tent. The Patel, Patel, of the neighboring village, something between a tax collector and a judge, and 2 zemindars, landowners, rode over to present us their respects and to invite us and our Hindu friends, some of whom they had known previously, to accompany them to their houses. On hearing that we intended to spend the night in the dead town, they grew awfully indignant. They assured us it was highly dangerous and utterly impossible. 2 hours later, hyenas, tigers, and other beasts of prey were sure to come out from under every bush and every ruined wall, without mentioning thousands of jackals and wild cats. Our elephants would not stay, and if they did not stay, no doubt they would be devoured. And if they did stay, no doubt they would be devoured. We ought to leave the ruins as quickly as possible and go with them to the nearest village, which would not take us more than half an hour. In the village, Everything had been prepared for us, and our friend Babu was already there and getting impatient at our delay. Only on hearing this did we become aware that our bareheaded and cautious friend was conspicuous by his absence. Probably he had left some time ago without consulting us and made straight to the village, where he evidently had friends. Sending for us was a mere trick of his. But the evening was so sweet, and we felt so comfortable, that the idea of upsetting our plans for the morning was not at all attractive. Besides, it seemed quite ridiculous to think that the ruins amongst which we had wandered several hours without meeting anything more dangerous than a snake swarmed with wild animals. So we smiled and returned thanks, but would not accept the invitation. "But you positively must not dare to stay here," insisted the fat Patel. "In case of accident, I shall be responsible for you to the government. Is it possible you do not dread a sleepless night spent in fighting jackals, if not something worse? You do not believe that you are surrounded with wild animals. It is true that they are invisible until sunset, but nevertheless they are dangerous. If you do not believe us, believe the instinct of your elephants, who are as brave as you, but a little more reasonable. Look at them." We looked. Truly, our grave, philosophic-looking elephants behaved very strangely at this moment. Their lifted trunks looked like huge points of interrogation. They snorted and stamped restively. In another minute, one of them tore the thick rope with which he was tied to a broken pillar and made a sudden volte-face with all his heavy body and stood against the wind, sniffing the air. Evidently he perceived some dangerous animal in the neighborhood. The colonel stared at him through his spectacles and whistled very meaningly. "Well, well," he remarked, "what shall we do if the tigers really assault us?" What shall we do indeed, was my thought. Thakur Gulab Lal Singh is not here to protect us. Our Hindu companions sat on the carpet after their Oriental fashion, quietly chewing betel, B-E-T-E-L. On being asked their opinion, they said they would not interfere with our decision and were ready to do exactly as we liked. But as for the European portion of our party, there was no use concealing the fact that we were frightened, and we speedily prepared to start. 5 minutes later we mounted the elephants, and in a quarter of an hour, just as the sun disappeared behind the mountain and the heavy darkness instantaneously fell, we passed the gate of Akbar and descended into the valley. We were hardly a quarter of a mile from our abandoned camping place when the cypress grove resounded with shrieking howls of jackals, followed by a well-known mighty roar. There was no longer any possibility of doubting. The tigers were disappointed at our escape. Their discontentment shook the very air, and cold perspiration stood on our brows. Our elephants sprang forward, upsetting the order of our procession and threatening to crush the horses and their riders before us. We ourselves, however, were out of danger. We sat in a strong howdah, H-O-W-D-A-H, locked as in a dungeon. It is useless to deny that we have had a narrow escape, remarked the colonel, looking out of the window at some 20 servants of the Patel, who were busily lighting torches.